You didn't get stuck in traffic, did you?
Okay, it is time to get started. This is the Transportation Appropriations Subcommittee. Let's start off, as we should every morning, with a talk with the Master. If you bow with me, please. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, I thank you so much for the start of the spring season. Thank you for safety and providing us safe passage here. Lord, I pray for this state. Give us wisdom, understanding, and love for our fellow man as we conduct business in a way that be pleasing to you. In your name I pray. Amen.
Amen.
So 2 days ago, we started turning land on the farm. Has absolutely nothing to do with transportation, but it's the spring part of the season, and everything is wonderful. Baseball will be starting up. I don't know if the catchers and pitchers have reported yet. I can't see, not yet, but it's close. In the spring of the year, our baseball players that have played baseball the entirety of their life, they report to spring training for spring training, and they cover the basics. They do the pitchers. They will practice throwing to the plate, and then they'll know on the ball hit on the right side of the infield, they go and cover first, like they've done forever. But it's a reminder of the basics. I said that to say this, for the members of our committee here, those that are online, I want to talk about just briefly before we have the commissioner, the fund sources that we use. And I explained this to one of our members that was not part of the committee, but we have several buckets, and I love the analogy that the commissioner gave, and actually I'm stealing a little bit, but I'm giving you credit. The buckets of money that we have that flow through transportation are our motor fuels, the excise tax. We have transportation fees, which are hotel, motel, and heavy equipment, EV fees. We have our federal dollars, state general funds, and the ride share for transit, 50 cent Uber, Lyft. So these are the things that we use in order to fund these projects that we're going to talk about today. And with that, Commissioner, it is good to have you. I'm going to turn it over to you, my friend.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I certainly appreciate the baseball analogy in spring. As the proud parent of a high school baseball player who is committed to play baseball in college, I really do appreciate that intro. So it is the season. We hope that MLB and the owners and the players can get together, so we'll have a MLB season. But college baseball and high school baseball is wide open, so life is good. So we're in agreement. It is our pleasure to present the FY23 budget to you. And the first thing I want to do is to this subcommittee is to say a big thank you for the work you did in the amended 22. We really appreciate your work to help us in line with your comments about the buckets of money to get those lined up properly such that we can advance projects and programs. So thank you. And of course, a big shout out to Abby for making it happen, and we really appreciate that. So let me start on page 2, as you already referenced the federal piece. Let me talk a little bit about that to just inform you where we are federally, because those are multiple buckets of money that is rather large. I'll remind the subcommittee that the full federal appropriation for the bipartisan infrastructure law has yet to be fully appropriated. So since we were together last time, Congress has passed now another continuing resolution till March the 11th. So what that means is that we're working on last year's federal appropriations and on a daily pro rata share of federal dollars, which only total about $464 million federal dollars available to GDOT, of which we've already pulled down and used out of 1.8 billion. So since the federal fiscal year starts on October 1 up till today, February 23rd, we've only received, $464 million of reimbursement from the federal government. The reason I tell you this is that we are entering a point where this is beginning to impact our ability to deliver projects. What the federal government allows you to do is to do basically an IOU where federal dollars are not readily available as they are not now. You can advance a project federally as if it's going to be federally funded. We work through the federal financing and accounting system, and we say this project will be federal funds, but we use state funds to advance it. But as soon as Congress does full appropriations, Angela Whitworth and her team in accounting will be able to go seek those federal funds and swap them with the state funds and pay ourselves back, if you will. But we've advanced or paid it forward with state dollars, the federal program, as far as we can go at this point. And we are now in the timeline where we are basically getting the federal approvals for bidding projects in April. So here we are in February, but the time to get the federal approval is right now for projects in April. Due to the uncertainty based on March 11th, and in this timeline for April, we're going to throttle back some projects in the April letting to leave us a little bit of a cushion so that there's some important projects in May that if Congress does not act for full appropriations, we can advance some strategic projects that are sitting out in May. So a complicated story. The graph on the bottom of this chart sort of shows you the overlap of state budget year, federal budget year. And when we get into this time of the year, as we advertise and bid projects, when they sign those contracts is what goes through the accounting process of when things get booked on the state budget. So we're getting into a point of time where some things would hit in 22, some things would hit in state 23 to match up with federal money. Sorry, yes, sir.
Let me ask you a question, and I apologize for jumping in here. But as a former economist and banker, when you run out of cash, you run out of business. And the same is true for you. So in terms of lag, so we have this project that's on the federal list and we're going to use eventually federal dollars. The work is done. We pay them from our funds. We're expecting to be reimbursed. How long does it take? So as a general rule, I know we're in uncertain times now, but as a general rule, how long does it take to get our money back?
Very quick in general, in normal circumstances. Usually you do a weekly, about a weekly billing, and it happens within a day or two. So it is an automated system when there are appropriations.
Thank you. So
we're just in that lag. So sorry for the complexity of that, but we're getting into this point that's, this uncertainty. And I would just say that this is unlike previous federal budget years where we have a continuing resolution that may get you into January or February, but now we're getting into March. It's really compressing us in the state budget year, and you got that federal overlap. So, and that's sort of important as we go to the next slide. And this is the same slide I've shared with you before. As the bipartisan infrastructure law has more funding, it requires more state match. And of course, it hadn't been fully appropriated yet, but when it is fully appropriated, you can see by program here, the additional state dollars it will take to pull down this additional federal dollars. And again, it's usually at 80% federal, 20% state. So it is still really good leverage, but I just keep this in front of you and also say thank you in the amended 22 budget year for that recognition and helping in the capital construction program. So that certainly helps us be able to pull down those federal dollars when they become available. On the next slide is the same slide you've seen before, and I left it in here to say thank you again for the recognition of the House and the support of the $5,000 in the amended 22, and then to carry that forward as we work on trying to retain our employees. Last time I showed you this slide, our staff numbers were 3,637 employees. Today it's 3,607. We have lost 30 employees since we were here together. We hired about 20 more, but we netted 30 loss. So this is, again, the importance, and again, a big thank you to this subcommittee and the full appropriations committee from the House to recognize retaining our employees, which is very critical. Let me move in now to really the 23 budget over on the next slide, slide 5. And this is the revenue chart comparison. And we started with the base, showing you the changes in revenue, and then what the 23 big budget looks like. But we slid off to the right just as a reminder of what amended 22 ended up. It's always good for a comparison's sake. Obviously, excise increased by $48.8 million, bringing it to a little over $2 billion of excise. As Chairman, as you mentioned, there are different buckets of money. So the Transportation Trust Fund fees, or as you articulated, now total $150.9 million. I would note the comparison to amended 22 at 186. There's a little bit of a lag in that. We'll see that number catch up in the Transportation Trust Fund. The next one is the Transit Trust Fund. As you said, the rideshare fees total $15.9 million, an add of 8.2 over the base. And of course, the base was in the first year of collection. So that base is going to stay pretty low until it catches up in the next budget cycle. There was $2.5 million of state general funds in the base that came out. I'll talk to what those were, why that came out. And then Greta is attached to the Department of Community Affairs. Those are adjustments are in recognition of the $5,000 and the GSEPs and leave payout. And that comes out of our budget, goes over to DCA's budget for the Georgia Regional Transportation Authority. So that leaves a total budget at $2.175 billion, which is a good number. It is about 0.4% higher than the amended budget. So, still a good solid number there. I give you a little bit of perspective back on the Transportation Trust Fund. Obviously, the pandemic had a big impact on those fees. We're seeing those recover pretty well. The highest year we ever saw was back in FY20 for the transportation fees at $194.7 million. So you can see the amended year was pretty close at 186, and I feel real bullish that those numbers are going to continue to grow. That may be an economist term. So anyway, maybe more of an investor term. All right, the next slide is slide 6. And again, you've seen this format before where we aggregate our budget programs into sort of the buckets of what they really do, with the biggest bucket being capital projects, which consist of 3 capital programs: capital construction, capital maintenance, and local roads admin at $1.047 billion. So that goes right into those capital projects. It represents 48% of the state budget, and that's up about 2% as compared to amended 22. So that percentage share grew. And then the other biggest bucket is routine maintenance, which is the taking care of the roadways, roadsides, and bridges, about 21% of our budget. And so you can see, and then LMIG is at 10%. That number grew, and I'll go over that in a minute. As it relates to increased in excise. So that's the budget breakdown. Now, if you flip over to the next slide on 7, this is where we take each budget program and walk through that. And the way we have this table laid out is you have the state budget program on the left column. The second column over is the fund source, Mr. Chairman. As you talked about, there's different buckets of money. So this shows where the allocations of the different sources of funding go to each state budget program. The first line item there is GO bond debt service, which is good news, as our bond service debt or debt bond service has been reduced by a total of $39 million. Those dollars, the motor fuel dollars, get redistributed into the other state budget programs. The transportation trust fees are redistributed into the intermodal program, and I'll talk about the intermodal program in a moment. The next line item is the capital construction budget. It stays the same at $897 million, and that will advance state projects, provide that federal match to capital program. Capital maintenance is the next line item that increased by $19.1 million over the base, bringing it back to $79 million for motor fuel. And then there's transportation fees that are added into that capital maintenance program as well at $66.2 million add, which represents an $85 million increase, bringing a total for capital maintenance back to $145 million. Now, those numbers look like a big add, and they are. And I need to remind you that in the 22 base, we reduced capital maintenance because we had the federal corona relief dollars that came into play. So back in 22, we moved money out of capital maintenance up into capital construction to keep projects going. So this is now the recognition and correction back because those were one-time dollars. So we're getting our capital maintenance budget back to close to where it needs to be. So that's why that shows up as such. Now, the other budget categories on this slide and the next few, actually on the next slide, are all redistribution of dollars. The adds are to address the $5,000 retention and recruitment line items. Now, when you look at the budget, what you won't see is the leave payout calculations in these or the GSEPs adjustment in these line items on this slide and the next one. And Mr. Chair, we would look forward to continue to work with this subcommittee as we did in the 22 to make the adjustments necessary to recognize that each of these programs are fairly complex. Some of them are partially federally funded with employees and some are not. And so trying to get that adjustments through there, and especially to adjust the leave payout and the GSEPs proposal, we need to get that recognized, and we'll look forward to have an opportunity to work with you on that as we move forward. So over on slide 8 is same thing. Let me just highlight LMIG increase by 4.8 million, and that's a recognition of the increase in the excise collection. So very good. That goes a long way to help our cities and our counties, and very grateful to have that ability to handle those. I will note over in planning, you see a reduction of $313,000. It actually represents a removal of a line item from the previous budget of $500,000. That was a regional planning study down in Middle Georgia. And then the delta between the 500 and the 313 is adding back for the $5,000 pay increase and for recruitment and retention efforts. So that's why it ends up at 313,000. And then routine maintenance, you can see again, all those adds are tied to the 5,000 in recruitment and retention. Let me move over to slide 9, moving pretty quickly here. In intermodal. So intermodal, when you see the top line items again, these are broken down by the fund sources. And so intermodal was a standalone program, and that has now been broken out into the different modes of the intermodal program: airport, aid, ports and waterways, transit, and rail. And so the top of this chart shows basically the fund source changes to zero out the current intermodal program and creating individual programs by mode. So airport aid is $16.3 million. It actually saw a $1 million reduction from 22 because there was a $1 million add back in 22 base. And so that was an adjustment there. Ports and waterways was increased by about $29,000, and that's for pay increases, the $5,000 pay increases, the leave payout, and the GSEPs adjustments, and a little bit like $150 for the Teamworks distribution. The rail program actually increased by about $28,000. And again, the reason for that increase to rail was, leave payout, GSEPs, Teamworks billing, and the $5,000. There was a reduction in rail of $125,000 out of the base due to some previous line items for some rail work on two projects out of the base. So if you total up the airport aid, the ports and waterways, and rail, and transit trust, the transportation trust fund, that's a tongue twister, transportation trust fund, if you total those up, it represents about a $22.1 million budget between airport aid, ports and waterways, rail, and the transportation fee of transit. And as I told you on the earlier slide, in GO bond debt, there was about $19.4 million that was redistributed out of the bond debt reduction savings that is applied basically over to fund the intermodal program. So the last line item here is transit trust fund, which is the rideshare fees, which total the $15.92 million, of which that is shared between the ATL and GDOT for rural and non-urban transit or non-large urban transit. And so that's the breakdown of intermodal. And as you go on to the next page, slide 10, are payments to Serta. That reduction in payments to Serta, which total $38 million, is again due to lower debt service and Serta operating from what they call their FSTR last year, basically bonding their operations. Previously, we were funding their operations, but they're using their toll revenue to cover their operations now. So that's why you see such a big reduction there. And then the last item there is payments to ATL, and that's the recognition of the $5,000, the GSEPs, the leave payout, and some Teamworks billing. So, Mr. Chairman, that's a deep dive into the budget. I'll be glad to entertain any questions or comments.
Thank you, Commissioner. So one thing I just like to say, so in the amended budget, the committee did a fund swap. The legislative intent of HB 170 has been to use the fees, the transportation fees, first for debt service. And that is what we reflected in the 22 budget, which is not reflected in this budget yet from OPB. Am I correct?
That's my understanding. Yes, sir.
And so that for the committee, that's something that we'll be looking at going forward. I think in 2018, we had all of the debt service was taken care of by our transportation fees. Because of budgetary constraints, we moved away from that for the next 2 years, but that's something that we will continue to look at. So a question I have is, so our intermodal breakout is the new part that we're looking at from the committee on this budget. If John Kendi would have done appropriate movie and called it Planes, Trains, and Boats, it would be easier to come up with. But so in the intermodal fees or in intermodal sections, how did you come up with, or in reference to this budget, because it is broken out, it all was kind of together. Are we fairly well matched with the needs in these programs for airport aid, for planes, transit, and boats, the ports and waterways?
Yeah, well, Mr. Chairman, one, let me recognize and give appreciation to the General Assembly here, House and Senate, back on the passage of HB 511 that recognized those transit trust fund fees to have a revenue source for transit. Now, the breakout of these, always the answer I'm going to give you is always, with more revenue, we can do more. And I just met with an airport yesterday saying, our budget is, they could pretty much use our budget, our entire budget. So to the study committee that was advanced through last year on airport aid, I think there was a huge acknowledgement that there's a big need with a huge return on investment. And I think the highlight of that study might have been what North Carolina had done. Their General Assembly recognized the return on investment of what an airport yields to communities for economic development purposes.
Tremendous bang for the buck.
Right.
I actually served on that committee as well.
So the answer is, if there was more dollars, obviously there's more things that can be done in each of these categories. I will say again, a thank you for Amendment 22 with the recognition of rail, the additional money for rail. We intend to leverage those dollars with some federal grants that could be almost a 50-50 leverage. Our previous few years ago, we were able to go after some federal grants that turned into a 50-50 leverage. So that's a really good deal. So with recognition of more revenue, we certainly can advance more. That rail investment in Amendment 22 will get us about 2/3 of the way to the Class 2 rail standards, which is a whopping speed of 25 miles an hour and 286,000 pounds of a rail car, which is important, but 25 miles an hour is still sort of slow. But
it is, but it beats the 5 mile an hour
yes,
that
it
is on
does.
some of those rail lines now.
Indeed.
So
Indeed.
you're correct. Thank you, Commissioner. Do I have any other questions from members of the committee? I do have Chairman Vance.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You don't have a crystal ball, I know, and how long, I guess first part of the question would be, how long have we been on a continuing resolution? And with your inside knowledge, working with FHWA and all, what do you think? Are we going to just go a lifetime on continuing resolutions, or what are we going to do?
Yeah, thank you, Representative Smith. It's become the norm, regrettably, but what the norm had been is usually on October 1, a continuing resolution into maybe November, and something passed around the first of the calendar year, if not at the end of the calendar year through Congress. This year has been a lot different. And quite honestly, with the bipartisan infrastructure law passed with such a sea-level increase in funding, but the funding's not as tied to it yet, is a little concerning. And my crystal ball is still in the repair shop, as you mentioned, but I'm a little concerned of what's going on in the world today globally, that's going to have an impact, and the focus may just be on that and not on other things. And transportation is one of the other things that could get left behind. And that was why, and you can certainly appreciate that, that's what this is why we sort of throttle back April lettings for now. Now, if March 11 comes and there's a full appropriation, we had a conversation with Federal Highway. Well, we're going to start hitting the button to get reimbursed really quick, and then we can advance full amount of projects in April. But we're just in this limbo area between now and March 11th for where we normally get those federal approvals to bid projects. That would be in April right now. And so we're just in this time of lurch and try to figure it out. So I would hate to put any odds on it. I'd say it's 50-50 at the moment that there would be a full continuing resolution that addressed full funding for transportation.
And one more, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
It's all about management. I mean, you're leading a great team, you're a good leader, and you just have to stay on top of that. And I appreciate what you do, because we got a lot of citizens, almost 11 million of them, that depend on going to work and going home and going to baseball, so appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
And I'll recognize now Chairman Jay Collins online for a question.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can y'all hear me?
Yes, sir.
My question for the commissioner, and I just echo what my colleague there said about keep on doing the good job you're doing. We really appreciate it. These projects that are going to be delayed or the letting of the project, are you going to notify the local governments that are involved, or are you just going to just kind of see how that goes and then let them know? How's that going to work?
Thank you, Representative Collins. We're gonna hold right now, and when I say delay in projects, it's probably about $15-20 million of projects that we were going to bid in April. So I don't want to sound the panic alarm just yet. We're going to just see how this plays out, but before we would delay, and if the delay would be until there's full federal reauthorization. So hopefully, if the delay happens, hopefully it's no more than a month at the worst, I would hope. So, but
Okay.
yes, sir, I appreciate that, because people are counting on projects. We've said we're going to get them done on get to a bid on a certain day. So we would certainly give notice if they are, a local project or the communities know about it. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions from members of the committee? Hearing none, seeing none. Thank you, Commissioner. You're very kind to share your time with us today.
Thank you very much.
Next up, we have Director Chris Tomlinson. The mic is hot, as is the seat. Come on down, my friend.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, both here and online. Today, I'd like to present to you the FY23 Governor's recommended budget for Serta, Greta, and the ATL. In large part, this information will provide a little bit more detail and insight into some of the particular items that Commissioner McMurray mentioned as it relates to the authorities. Starting with slide 2. There we go. So I'd like to begin with Greta. So the FY 2023 recommendation includes $9,093 for the statewide cost of living increase, and also includes the dedication of transportation trust funds for the purpose of funding the authority. Now, as you can see, the Greta budget, relatively speaking, is very small at a little over $330,000. And that's because we have a matrix form of organization. The adjustments that we need for cost of living when we look at the Greta budget is small, because it's covering about 2.25 full-time employees, because we have a cost-sharing relationship with the other agencies. If we move to slide 3, we'll turn to the ATL. A little bit larger budget, larger entity. So the FY 2023 recommendation includes $94,567 for the statewide cost of living increase, as well as $68,402 for the associated employee retirement system related adjustments. Now, for both Greta and the ATL, we continue to work with OPB to reconcile these statewide amounts, because just like the commissioner mentioned, we have a mix of funds. Some of these positions are partially funded with federal dollars. Others are shared between both Serta and the ATL or Greta. So getting down to the right exact dollar mix just may require a few adjustments, and those conversations are ongoing with OPB as well as with the House and Senate budget offices. But as recommended, these are the recommendations, and we too are very grateful for what this is going to mean for our ability to both attract and retain our talented workforce. In total, you'll see a total FY 2023 budget for the ATL of $12,996,296. And again, that is coming from transportation trust funds to fund the authority. If you go to the next slide, while we're talking about this, and again, I want to provide some additional information on rideshare. Over the years, I think the state's gotten a bad rap for people are saying, well, the state's not doing that much in transit, et cetera. But the reality is that actually isn't true, and hasn't been true for a long time. Whether you go all the way back to House Bill 170, where funds were set aside, bond funds to go into transit. When you look at the $100 million that was put forth to do more bonds for transit statewide, the state actually has a very long tradition. And that's not even without counting the millions, the tens of millions of dollars that the state provides in match when it comes to programs in DCH and DHS for related to rural transit.
Can I have you repeat that again? That's, we don't get often an accolades here, but that was very good to hear. I'd like to hear it
Sure,
again.
the state provides matching funds for transit and has done bond funding for transit over the years. And without that state match to go towards the federal programs, transit, the way it exists, our dial-a-ride services throughout the state simply could not and would not occur. And now with the rideshare fees, the state again has come to the forefront with a dedicated source for transit. So I want to talk a little bit about that because we feel very fortunate at the ATL to work in coordination with the General Assembly as well as with the commissioner in GDOT, since the commissioner serves as the trustee for the Transit Trust Fund, on how best can this new state source be leveraged to pull down federal dollars. So we're always looking for the best ways to do that. And we believe that the rideshare fees can be used to secure almost a 4-to-1 return on dollars. And just for each of those dollars, pulling down significant dollars. When we look at the amount of money that we're talking about that will probably pass from GDOT through the trust fund to ATL to again go out to local projects, we are forecasting that $50 to $90 million in federal funds will be able to be secured and pulled down by the ability to use these rideshare fees as match. So the state again is a significant player, and this is a source that will, I think, continue to grow over time. So I wanted to make this point because Georgia historically has been underperforming some of its peer states when it looks to our ability to pull down some of these federal discretionary funds. We do very well on the formula funds. We're the 8th most populous state. When you look at the formula dollars coming to the highway program, we rank 8th. So again, kudos to Commissioner McMurray and his team. We're pulling down our fair share. In some years, we actually even do a little bit better than that. When it comes to the transit side, and we're looking at this statewide, so not just at state government, but statewide, on the formula dollars, again, a lot of these are population driven, 8th most populous state. We pull down about 12th when it comes to the formula dollars. And that's in large strength because of the size and scope of MARTA's program, as well as the robust programs in at the state level and in Cobb County and in Gwinnett County, just to single out a few. But when it comes to the discretionary dollars, the ones you have to compete for, right now we're ranked 35th out of 50 states, 35th. And so these rideshare dollars, I think, is going to help us start to move up. And to be fair to MARTA and the other counties, several are gearing up on large scale capital programs, which they will line up to compete and try to, again, move our ranking up. But again, as far as the state's role in that, these rideshare fees, we're right there at the table, and the local governments need to be there too to identify their sources of match, but the state's right there with money that's been recognized today. And we continue to work closely with GDOT on these efforts to utilize some of that for both metro areas as well as for rural. You go to the next slide. Not really part of the budget, but I can't pass up the opportunity to keep this committee and the General Assembly in general aware of an upcoming statutory deadline. So by January 1, according to House Bill 930 that created the ATL, all of the regional transit operators within the 13 county jurisdiction of the ATL must start using and prominently displaying the ATL logo in addition to their logos on their fleets. We've been working very closely over the past year with all of the providers. This includes providers such as Cherokee Area Transit, Cobb Link, MARTA, et cetera. And you will start seeing between now and January 1st, more entities displaying the ATL logo. This doesn't supplant what they have, but rather is to signify to our citizens and our visitors that all of this transit is part of a connected network of services that are available to them. We're working closely to make sure everyone's going to be in compliance. And again, I just want to bring it up because by the next session, this deadline will have passed. So if anyone has any questions, either for me or for any of you, this is their opportunity to ask it over these upcoming weeks and months. All right, last but not least, turning to the budget of the State Road and Tollway Authority. So first you will see a standard reduction of just $2,075 for debt service. And I'll go over a little bit about the debt service here in a moment. But the commissioner mentioned the larger ticket item that you see, a reduction of $38.8 million. Again, first of all, I wanted to say thank you. That money was added to the FY22 budget, one-time funds for the highest annual debt service that needs to be set aside in order for us to do the bond sale that we did. Commissioner mentioned our FSTR, or our financing strategy for tolling resilience. Essentially what we did with the help and support of the state is refund or refinance our existing debt. We achieved savings of over $90 million and interest cost savings, and we received an interest rate of 2.5% when these bonds were sold last July. As we see what's happening with interest rates, inflation, and some of the moves from the feds, our timing probably couldn't have been any better. So again, thank you for that. But that was a one-time reduction, and I'm happy to say that is coming out of the big budget.
That it was tremendous timing. Take a victory lap on that, all that were responsible. And I need some stock tips. Good job.
Well, thank you. If you turn to the next slide, I'll go back and talk about the overall majority of funding in SRTA's appropriated budget is related to debt service on what we call GRBs and GARVI principle. GARVI stands for Grant Anticipation Revenue Vehicles. But these are bonds. This has nothing to do with tolls. These are bonds that were sold to enable the acceleration of transportation projects done by GDOT. So those bonds, because they're not traditional public debt under the state constitution, are issued by us, but in large part it's leveraging the federal funding as a debt service payment for the majority of the debt service payments, and there is a state match portion. But with these payments in the FY23 budget, our outstanding GRB and GARVI principal will be reduced by another $60.46 million over the next fiscal year. So we will, by June 30th of 2023, we will have gone from $494.57 million in outstanding principal down to $434.11 million. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions from the committee.
I will recognize Vance Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chris, thanks. How about out of your buses, have you transitioned? Are we natural gas? How are we set up now, and what's your goal on all your buses?
Great. So when it comes to the express regional commuter fleet, and thank you for the question, Representative Smith. When it comes to the fleet, we have a fleet of approximately 166 buses. We have no natural gas. They're all diesel. I would say about 50% of the fleet are what we would refer to as clean diesel buses. And we are on track to replace 10 buses with our first all-electric vehicles in approximately the next year. We received a federal grant to help with this cost of $5.4 million. And we're looking at combining that with money from the VW settlement funds which was already been set aside for us to update our fleet with more clean diesel buses. So all diesel and 10 electric that are coming in the near future.
Are any other questions from the committee? Nor online. Great job.
All right.
Thank you, Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Anything else from the committee members for the good of the committee? We are then dismissed. Thank you.